The link to this article will be in the description. Most lunar Sabbatarians and non-lunar Sabbatarians believe that Jesus died on the 6th day of the week in the year AD 31. By the way, this is AD 31 in the Friday Crucifixion, as we're talking about here. Is it possible for Jesus to have died in 31 AD on Friday? The Bible's clear in the gospel accounts that the day of the crucifixion was the day of preparation, the 6th day of the week, the day before the Sabbath. And Jesus cried with a loud voice and gave up the ghost. And now, when the even was come, because it was the preparation, that is, the day before the Sabbath. Mark 15:37-42. Now, some have said it's the day before the Sabbath of the Passover, which was free floating during what day of the week it was, because it was based on the moon, the calendar of the moon. And of course, lunar Sabbatarians is what they do is they align the weekly Sabbath as being the same every year. In other words, they're going to say the Jews used a purely lunar calendar, and this weekly Sabbath was also aligned with that. I disagree with that, because they hadn't been given the calendar, but they'd been given the weekly mandate for the weekly Sabbath, which is every seventh day. And most people that even keep the feast days based on the Hebrew calendar, which is cited by the moon, don't believe the weekly Sabbath is perfectly aligned with the moon, with every Sabbath of every month. And so it's kind of like three groups here: lunar Sabbatarians, people who keep the feasts, and 7-day Sabbatarians. Lunar Sabbatarians just means they align the weekly Sabbath with the Hebrew calendar, which is based on the moon. But most people understand that there's modifications. That is, it's not a lunar calendar, which has 360 days every year. It's 12 months or whatever. Actually, I'm not sure if they all still hold to that exactly, but they align the weekly Sabbath with the Hebrew calendar in a weird way, usually. Okay, so here's the issue. We have this confirmation of the 6th day of the week crucifixion from the pen of inspiration. So this is someone who's Adventist. So there's quotes from Ellen White in here that this author wants to align with the understanding he's putting forth. We have the confirmation of the 6th day of the week crucifixion from the pen of inspiration. So Ellen White said that crucifixion was a Friday. Adventists believe that Passover aligned with the weekly Sabbath. In other words, the high Sabbath would be the Sabbath. The Passover landed on a weekly Sabbath. The year of Jesus' crucifixion is the idea. So this is what she wrote in Desire of Ages, page 794. Trouble seemed crowding upon trouble. On the 6th day of the week, they had seen their master die. How can we say that the year of the crucifixion was AD 31? Based on the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel 9, we know that AD 31 is accurate. The 70th week of Daniel's prophecy was from the 17th week of Daniel's prophecy was from AD 27 to AD 34, because they're years, right? The 70th week. And Christ died in the middle of the final prophetic week, which was the spring of AD 31. There are 3 further New Testament proofs to show AD 27 was the year of baptism of Jesus, which makes AD 31, after 3.5 years of ministry, the death of our Lord. Proof 1, the death of Herod. Herod died somewhere around 4 BC. Jesus was baptized when he was about 30 years old, according to Luke 3:23. So that puts Jesus' baptism at 27, AD 27, 30 years from 4 BC. 2, the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar. Luke records the baptism of Jesus to be in the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar, Luke 3:1 and verse 21. According to historical records, the 15th year of Tiberius was AD 27. If you count as, when you count from what the historical records say, it'll just make it simple. There's two possible dates you can get from the historical record, but that's one of them. When Jesus visited the Jerusalem temple for the first time after his baptism in the month of Abib, the first Jewish month, he had a discussion with the leaders of the Jews. He said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." John 2:19. To which they replied that the temple had been in construction for 46 years, so how could he rebuild it in 3 days? From historical records, we know that Herod started to rebuild the temple in 20/19 BC, depending on your calendar you're using. There's issues in the... It's not really disputed. The literature says 20/19, which they do with a lot of years, is including the year 458/57 for the decree of Artaxerxes in the 7th year, and 458/457 BC. It depends. It has to do with the spring and what calendar you use, what calendar you think the Jews are using, what do you think the Babylonians were using, a spring calendar, a fall calendar. So they just put it that way. This is from David S. Dockery, Holman Bible Handbook, page 522. For the 20/19 BC date, which is 46 years before 27 AD. The year AD 31 is also confirmed in Ellen White's writing. In the spring of AD 31, Christ, the true sacrifice, was offered on Calvary. The Desire of Ages, page 233. Lunar Sabbatarians also believe that in AD 31, on the 6th day of the week, Jesus died. Passover falls on the 6th day of the week. This is from some Lunar Sabbatarian site. Also, the prophecies of Daniel pinpoint AD 31. This is World's Last Chance. He's a Lunar Sabbatarian, I think. Let's see, who cares? Okay, Ellen White also said, not only does Ellen White call it the 6th day of the week, but she also calls it Friday, which is the 6th day of the week in the Gregorian calendar. From eyewitnesses, some of the disciples had obtained quite a full account of the events of Friday. Others beheld the scenes of the crucifixion with their own eyes in Christ's Triumph at page 295. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so here's the issue. The problem arises from the fact that when the new moon, which is how they started a month, by the sighting of the moon, okay, within a year, because you would sight the moon, which I'll get into, and then in the Bible it'll say like on the 14th day of this month, and the month started by the sighting of the moon. So once you sighted the moon, 14 days later, that's Passover. Okay. According to the astronomical data, according to the Lunar Sabbatarians, and Chris Lucas, I think, the new moon and full moon in the year of AD 31, the full moon, Passover is always during full moon. In April, which would be the month of Nisan in 31 AD, was on a Wednesday on our Gregorian calendar. They also say there is no way you can get a Friday crucifixion in AD 31. And they say in AD 33, you can get a Friday crucifixion in the month of April, which is a common belief of other Christians who are not Sabbatarian, for instance. The only year that gets a Friday crucifixion is AD 33, so it's got to be AD 33, which is probably by far the most popular standard Christian dating, because this is one of the main reasons. Okay, so let's talk about that. They are saying, according to the astronomical data, which NASA is very accurate, right? According to the astronomical data available on the phases of the new moon and full moon in the year AD 31, the full moon, Passover is always during the full moon, and April was on Wednesday. Okay. Though many Protestants in the Catholic Church believe that Christ was crucified on Friday in AD 33, the Seventh-day Adventists believe, and have always believed, it occurred in AD 31 because of Daniel's time prophecy that started in 457 BC. And in Daniel 8 in AD 44, 1844, the 2300 years. The important time tucked in between is AD 31. And the crucifixion did not, if the crucifixion did not occur in AD 31, then the 2300 year prophecy did not end in 1844. So it's a serious challenge to the Adventist belief. Here's what the lunar Sabbatarians say about it. As people who believe in the 2300 day year prophecy of Daniel 8:14, beginning in 457 BC, see that 457 is the when you count the 2300 years, and from because you take from the Mare in Daniel 9, giving you the beginning of the prophecy. And so the 2300 years starts the same time as Jesus, the decree to when Jesus would show up in 27 AD, at 490 years after the decree. But Adventists rightly understand that Daniel 8 and 9 are connected. And so 2300, so that the 2300 prophecy of the evenings and mornings, which are years, because a day is a year, starts at the same point. So you have the same starting point for the 2300 as the Daniel 70 weeks, which I show in other videos is actually clearly the case. And so the crucifixion prophecy and its accuracy, which most Christians don't even recognize because of their historical ignorance, that's why we believe Jesus is the Messiah, because he fulfilled that prophecy according to the scriptures. But then they end up taking the historical thing that actually confirms it in the text and say it's about the Antichrist in the future. Although all their predecessors understood this to be talking about Jesus coming, which is really, really weird, just outrageous. But so anyways, in other words, the prophecies of Daniel, the timing of Jesus coming is highly significant to the 2300 years being ending in 1844. So here's what the lunar Sabbatarians say. As people who believe in the 2300 day year prophecy of Daniel 8:14, beginning in 457 BC, which is the right decree date, it's the only decree date that works. And if that's not it, then Jesus didn't fulfill, according to the scriptures, that he's the Messiah. There is no other possible year than AD 31 for the crucifixion, unless you're willing to give up 457 or 1844, which would be the ending date. We have seen that Daniel's time prophecy that the crucifixion year was indeed AD 31. We have seen that the day of the week was indeed the sixth day of the week. We also have seen that the pen of inspiration agreed to it and calls the sixth day of the week Friday, the week of the Gregorian calendar. So, let's see. So here's the astronomical facts. I don't even know what that was supposed to say. Astronomical facts. This is where it's interesting. Yes, since the phases of the moon can be predicted pretty accurately, we can, with modern technology and computation, go backward or forward to find out the phases of the moon at any given month of any year. So going back to the year AD 31, we get from reliable sources that the astronomical new moon in April occurred on the 10th of April at 11:32 a.m. Here's what the lunar Sabbatarians said. They agreed to this. The year was AD 31, and the first month of that year was April. Since NASA identifies the Gregorian 10th day to be the conjunction, and by the way, Chris Lucas, if you watch this, NASA, the ones that, do you believe them about they went to the moon? Because you've been using NASA data to prove Adventists wrong. I'm just wondering, do you believe that they went to the moon now? Because I heard you used to tell me you didn't believe we went to the moon because NASA's a fraud. So just curious about that. If you changed your mind, do you now believe that we landed on the moon? Just curious about that. Because you should. The year was AD 31 and the first month of that year was April. Since NASA identifies the Gregorian 10th day to be the conjunction, because they did land on the moon. All we must do is add a day to arrive at the first visible crescent as viewed in the night sky following sunset on the 11th of April. The following day, April 12, is then New Moon Day, which is also the first day of the lunar solar month of Abib or Nisan. Since we know from Scripture that Christ died on the 14th of the lunisolar month of Abib, then we simply count to 14 and therefore arrive at what's aligned with Wednesday, April 25, AD 31, as the day of Christ's crucifixion. Yes, the new moon in the first Jewish month was April 10th, but that is the new moon. But that is the new moon in conjunction. The biblical new moon, as they also say, is the crescent new moon. So the lunar Sabbatarians have just added one day extra to arrive at the first visible crescent to be viewed in the night sky of April 11th. Only the astronomical new moon can be found through calculations, not the crescent moon. Does the crescent moon always appear in one day's time? No. It's not always one day. Here's what the United States Naval Observatory had to say about the crescent moon. Although the date and time of each new moon can be computed exactly, see, for example, phases of the moon and data services, the visibility of the lunar crescent is a function of the new moon's age, the time counted from new moon, depends upon many factors and cannot be predicted with certainty. In the first 2 days after new moon, the young crescent moon appears very low in the western sky after sunset. It must be viewed through bright twilight. It sets shortly after sunset. Here's again what they say. Again, this will be in the description, these citations. This is a secondary source. Again, the United States Naval Observatory says, the sighting of the lunar crescent within 1 day of new moon is usually difficult. I think there's some discrepancy between Hebrew roots on what sites the starting of the month, if it's the crescent or the full moon. I forget, but I'll have to ask them about that. My friends that are that. The crescent at this time is quite thin, has a low surface brightness, and can easily be lost in the twilight. Generally, the lunar crescent will become visible to suitably located, experienced observers with good sky conditions about 1 day after the new moon. However, the time that the crescent actually becomes visible varies quite a bit 1 month to another. The United States Naval Observatory says that sighting of the lunar crescent within 1 day of the new moon is usually difficult. And the lunar Sabbatarians just add 1 day from the astronomical new moon to the crescent new moon. They assume 1 day took 1 day for them to sight it, which isn't necessarily the case. The lunar Sabbatarians also believe that it's not always possible to have a crescent new moon on a fixed day. If the crescent is observed for just a minute or less before the full dark and then disappears over the horizon, it's considered too young to be a new moon. When this occasionally occurs, sighting is delayed until the following night. The Karaite Jews say this about the sighting of the crescent moon. The ancient Israelites would have been well aware of the crescent new moon. In ancient societies, people worked from dawn to dusk, and they would have noticed the old moon getting smaller and smaller in the morning sky. When the morning moon had disappeared, the ancient Israelites would have anxiously awaited its reappearance 1.5 to 3.5 days later in the evening sky. Having disappeared for several days and then appearing anew in the early evening sky, they would have called it the new moon, or Hodesh, which means new. This is from the Karaite Corner, the new moon in the Hebrew Bible. We are told by this group of Jews that it takes up to 3.5 days from the astronomical moon to the crescent moon. Up to 3.5 days. Why does it take between 1.5 to 3.5 days between the astronomical new moon and the crescent moon? because the speed of the moon varies due to the shape of its orbit. The United States Naval Observatory says this: the moon's orbit is elliptical, and its speed is greatest when it is near perigee, least near apogee. If perigee occurs near new moon, the moon will appear to be moving away from the sun in the sky at a greater than average rate. So, we're not disputing the fact that the astronomical new moon in April AD 31 occurred on April 10th. Not disputing that. We're questioning the credibility of adding just one day to the astronomical new moon, as the lunar Sabbatarians have stated above, if that's accurate. Questioning that. It's not necessarily the case. The United States Naval Observatory says that sometimes even 2 days are too few to see the crescent new moon. The number of days depends on several factors. The Karaite Jews, which are not necessarily something they calculate. They don't calculate. It varies, in other words. The Karaite Jews tell us that it could take up to 3.5 days. There are no scientific records at all for the crescent moon appearance because there is no single parameter for its calculation. However, the time that the crescent actually becomes visible varies quite a bit from one month to another. How can these people conclude, the lunar Sabbatarians conclude, that it's a scientific fact that the crescent moon in April AD 31 was on the 12th? They have only added around 1.5 days to the astronomical moon, but we are told it can take any time between 1.5 and 3.5 days. The Jewish month starts from the crescent new moon. The 14th day later is the Passover. In the 14th day of the first month at even is the Lord's Passover, Leviticus 23:5. The 14th day from April 14 is April 27, and it's a Friday. April 14 is 3.5 days after, let's see. In other words, because of the varying amount of time it can take to cite the thing that starts the month, that makes a varying possibility for what day the Passover is, or what from the moon what day the Passover is, according to the moon, the sighting of the moon. Up between 1.5 and 3.5 days is a range. And that you can't prove through astronomical data, in other words, because all you can do is cite, or all you can know from the NASA data is the astronomical new moon. And so the sighting of it is within a range, which would start the month. Let's see. Again, the Jewish month starts from the crescent new moon. The 14th day is the Passover. In the 14th day of the first month, at even is the Lord's Passover, Leviticus 23:5. The 14th day from April 14 is April 27 and is a Friday on our calendar. The lunar Sabbatarians say that when Jesus died, it was the full moon because 14 days after the crescent new moon comes the full moon. The United States Naval Observatory records that April 25 in AD 31 was the full moon, not April 27. Oh, also, let's see. I think okay, Ellen White says this. Accompanied with his disciples, the Savior slowly made his way to the garden at Gethsemane. The Passover moon, broad and full, shone with a cloudless sky. The city of pilgrims' tents was hushed into silence. So the Passover moon, broad and full. So Ellen White says it was a full moon. Since it was not an astronomical new moon, it was also not an astronomical full moon. Is it possible to see the moon as broad and full for more than a single night? You can never know the difference the day before the astronomical full moon, the day of the astronomical full. See, I may read that again. Since it was not an astronomical new moon, it was also not an astronomical full moon. It is possible to see the moon as broad and full for more than a single night. You can never know the difference the day before the astronomical full moon from the day of the full moon, or from the day after the astronomical full moon. Exactly. Because it's full. The moon's full for more than one night. It's not just one night that the moon is full in the sky when it's full moon, right? You can't tell the difference between the astronomical one and the day before or after it, in other words. So if they didn't know which is the astronomical full moon, that could be the case. Was it the next night? Was that the astronomical full moon, or was it the night before? Although full moon occurs each month at a specific date and time, the moon's disk may appear to be full for several nights in a row if it is clear. This is because the percentage of the moon's disk that appears illuminated changes very slowly around the time of the full moon. The moon may appear 100% illuminated only on the night closest to the time of exactly full moon, but on the night before and the night after, it appears 97 to 99% illuminated. Most people would not notice the difference. Even 2 days from the full moon, the moon's disk is 93 to 97% illuminated, according to the United States Naval Observatory. So, it is very much possible that we have a full moon on Friday of AD 31, and that can be associated with the Jewish calendar. And like I said from the beginning, to those who think they've proven otherwise, you can't. It's not something you can prove. You can't prove it. You can show something as impossible, or not not able to be aligned with the biblical data and facts, quote unquote facts of history. And because of the way the Jewish economy, the Jewish system worked, it falls in a range of possible days because of the way their months were started, dependent on the sighting of the moon. And because the sighting of the moon visibly has a range of possibilities due to weather, human error, and just the system itself, the honest person has to recognize. So I'm not saying this proves Ellen White's right, but there's no data that actually disproves it. I think she is right for other reasons, so I'm going to go with this. But I'm equally willing to admit what the range of possibilities are. So you can't say it has to be 33 AD because that falls on a Friday. They didn't use the same system we use. You have to recognize the nuances and the details. And I'm not surprised that, once again, when closely looking at the data, you haven't disproved Ellen White, and you haven't proved a different date than 31 AD. When the details are examined, there's a range of possibility. You can't prove it, quote unquote, prove it, which one it is. It could be, there's reasons to think it's 33 AD on a Friday. There's reasons to think it's Wednesday in 31 AD, but there's reasons to think it's 31 on a Friday. And I think it was a Friday. And because of Daniel, because of the Bible, to be honest, it seems like it's saying that based on the other factors of the text about how it uses 3 days and 3 nights, how the day after the Sabbath works, the way it seems to say the preparation day. I believe, I know the Wednesday people say that doesn't work for various reasons, but I think it was a Friday. And because of Daniel, it has to be 31 AD because of Daniel. And there's no other data that says it has to be on 33 AD except for that people think it has to be on a Friday, and 33 is the only day it can be a Friday. But that's not true, because Passovers are based on the moon, not on a weekly cycle that's repeating. It changes every year. Because of that, so I'm going to go with that fact. Doesn't make it have to be 33 AD. That's an error, an easy error to make. Daniel says it has to be 31 because those are years to be counted. And now we know that there's a range of what day of the week it could be based on the way they sighted the moon. And I said that once again justifies the Adventist view as correct.